お嬢様。
Hello my lords and ladies, Joe here, and today I want to rank the jobs of Final Fantasy XIV. Specifically jobs available to the free trial in the context of doing trial content. A disclaimer, my honest advice is that you level up all the jobs and figure out which ones are for you yourself. All jobs are viable, don't let anything or anyone stop you from playing what you want to play. Now that you've clicked off the video, what I'm trying to do is help new players starting out who just want to know a little more about what they're getting into, and trying to list the jobs based off of the whole experience of Final Fantasy XIV and what it has to offer in the early game, from raiding to roulettes and everything in between. I think it goes without saying that this is all my educated opinion, which chances are will be different from yours. I have my biases, and I'm going to try and take as an objective perspective as I can. But before we get into it, help my channel raise through the ranks by leaving a like and a sub. Thanks in advance. First, I'd like to start out with Paladin. Paladin, my very first job. It has a special place in my heart. Now, Paladin is a tank, and let me tell you a little secret about tanking. It's the easiest role in the game. The reason people are intimidated by tanking is that if you mess up, it's very apparent. But the rotation is much easier than DPS, and they don't have the amount of responsibility that healers have. You just need to know how and when to mitigate with the occasional tank swap, and you are good. Not to mention that their queue times are pretty short as well. But getting into Paladin specifics, Paladin is basically the mitigation king. You have a shield that sometimes reduces damage automatically, you have Sheltron, a resource costing mitigation, plus your standard cooldown mitigations, and a party shield as well. I have used Paladin for both my clears of Bahamut and Alexander Savage. It's very satisfying seeing your Paladin raising his shield and blocking a tank buster. That being said, Paladin has its issues. Probably the most commonly known is that its damage isn't as good as the other tanks. And yeah, damage is its own kind of mitigation. The second, and I'd argue bigger problem, is that it has quote unquote useless skills. The big offenders at this level being cover and clemency. Not going to sugarcoat it, cover sucks. It costs oath gauge that you can use to mitigate instead. It has an absurdly long cooldown, and the worst part of it is that it only has a 10 Yalm range, the player you want to cover. There have been circumstances where cover could have been useful, but by having such a tiny range, I either can't get to the other player in time, or I risk stepping into an AoE and taking double damage. Clemency is a mixed bag. It's a decent heal. The thing is, healing is the healer's job. And if you're casting heals, you are not only not doing damage, but you can also no longer parry or block while you're casting. Also, with a huge MP cost, you can only get off 2 heals in a row. So if your healers are dead, you aren't going to be able to keep up. It definitely has better uses than cover, but just be wary of the side eye healers may give you for encroaching on their turf. On the positive side, for level 50 content, Paladin is especially durable. I have seen stressed out healers request tanks to be Paladins for some of the extremely high damage coil fights. Also, Gladiator starts in Ultima, so it gets bonus points for that. All in all, Paladin is A tier. Next, Monk. Monk certainly has grown on me. When you figure out Monk's rotation, it just feels like poetry. And at level 60, when you build up and unleash your tornado kick, it's very satisfying. However, because of how long Monk's rotation is and how chaotic some fights can get, it's easy to get lost on where you were in your rotation. Luckily, Monks are pretty forgiving if you make a mistake. They have a full AoE combo, so you aren't just hitting the same button over and over again in dungeon runs. It is also the only job that doesn't have any ranged attacks, but it trades this for the chakra gauge, which in my opinion is far better. There will be times in some fights where the boss will either be out of range or untargetable, and while everyone else is waiting around, Monks get to go Dragon Ball Z and charge up their chakra for a satisfying attack. It also has a 2-charge gap closer with a small cooldown. It has a useless button, as Formless Fist, which you get at level 54, becomes almost obsolete by level 60. Again, Pugilist starts out in Ultima, so there's bonus in that. A very fun melee DPS that I would give an A tier. Moving on to Black Mage, the very source of the healers adjust meme. Black Mage is like the black sheep of the DPS family. A job with long cast times that require you to stay still in a game known for its mobile combat. Still, I'd like to say outright that I really enjoy playing Black Mage, but it's for the same reasons that I am hesitant to recommend it to beginning players. Most jobs, it's fairly easy to figure out what your rotation is. Black Mage, not so much, especially at level 50. Here's a tip I can give you. If you want to do level 50 content with Black Mage, run some Crystal Tower Alliance raids. If your damage is towards the bottom of the list, you're probably doing it wrong, and you need to rework your rotation. At level 60, things start to become a little bit more clear on how you should cast your spells, but it still takes a methodical approach. And if you make a mistake, it's very unforgiving. When you drop your Astral Fire because you wanted to squeeze out one more Fire 4, oof, feels bad, man. And going back to their immobility, I can honestly say the majority of the times when I stood in an AoE, I was just so focused on my cast rotation that I didn't even see the AoE. I call it Black Mage brain. Playing Black Mage takes extra effort to figure out where you can stand still, how long you can stand still for, and moving while not dropping your elemental gauge. Black Mage also has a useless button of Scathe, which I am told is only used by the purest of masochists who try to do solo Palace of the Dead runs. Even though I really enjoy playing Black Mage and think it's a lot of fun, considering how difficult it is, I have to place it in C rank. Oh, and Thaumaturge starts out in Ultima, so there's that. Now for Warrior. Warrior at level 50 is a bit squishy when compared to Paladin, but when it gets to level 60, they are immortal. Want a mitigation with only a 25-second cooldown? Not good enough? How about it heals you as well? How about a self-heal on top of that? Who cares if you have the worst invulnerability in the game if you never need to use it? Not only are they the hardest tanks to kill, but they do really good damage as well. In fact, their rotation gets even more simple from level 50 to 60, because Felcleave. Yeah, just Felcleave. Even their best mitigation does damage. Whenever I want to do anything solo, from treasure maps to hunts, Warrior is the best bet. I hear that they are also great in Palace of the Dead as well. And being a tank, your queue times are short. The biggest downside is that it's so simple to play as it can be kinda boring. A great job to pick, especially if you are doing level 60 content. S tier. Time to talk about Summoner. Summoner is without a doubt the easiest job to play, and its damage is really good. Not only that, but the majority of Summoner spells don't even have a cast time, so they have great mobility, having to stand still for only 2 casts. On top of that, they are the only DPS that can raise players for level 50 and 60 content. The only downside to Summoner is that it may get boring playing such an easy job. Well, they also have DPS queue times, but c'est la vie. Summoner summed up is surely S tier. Moving on to Summoner's sibling job, Scholar. I'm gonna be out front. Scholar is the best healer. They have the most attack buttons, they have the best bubble, they have a way to empty their access Aether Flow resource into damage. They are a shield healer, but the fairy feels like a tiny regen that actually has a regen on cooldown. Every 3 minutes they can go pure healer mode with a generation of yet more Aether Flow. The only real downside to Scholar is that you can't dictate who your fairy heals. They'll just heal whoever has the lowest HP. There's also a brief period of time before you get lustrate where you feel like it's hard to keep up with the heals. But if you're playing the job right, you should be able to handle anything that comes at you. And as Summoner and Scholar both share the same starting class, Arcanist, if you level one, you level the other, making it extra convenient. Scholars get to the head of the class, S tier. Dragoon. Honestly, Dragoon never really appealed to me, but I thought it my duty to level it up and see how it felt. It has a very easy DPS rotation, with you weaving in your self buffs as they come off of cooldown, and having to pay attention to your positionals. But it doesn't feel that satisfying. With Dragoon, your big hit comes almost immediately, and it's just a normal button on your rotation that's been buffed as hard as you can. The most satisfying thing about Dragoon is your jumping gap closers. The problem with them is one has a 1 minute cooldown and the other has a 2 minute cooldown. That feels a lot longer in battle than you might think. And I don't know about you, but I find myself holding on to these attacks because I want to save them for a gap closer. And still in some fights, I find them on cooldown when I want to use them again. So it always feels like I'm either holding back damage or missing an opportune moment to use the jumps. Combine this with you having to compete with every other DPS for spots and dailies, I gotta put Dragoon in B tier. That brings us to Bard. Now I know what you're thinking. Oh, this guy loves Bard. He's always Bard in his videos. He's gonna say Bard is top tier. And it's true. I do love Bard. I use Bard to clear T9 Savage and Savage Brute Justice. I think it's a great leveling experience as it eases you in from a very simple class to a much more complicated rotation all the way to level 60. However, being so familiar with Bard, I can tell you of a unique problem that Bards have. Bards can't be around other Bards. While in a party, having two people playing the same job, while not optimal, isn't that big of a deal, except with Bards. The main theme of Bards, unsurprisingly, is their songs, and by level 60, you have a song up at every moment. But Bard songs do not stack, and Bards aren't known for their personal damage, using their songs to make the whole party do more damage. So if you have two Bards, it feels like there is dead weight. Except for T7 Savage, but that's only for the truly masochistic, and is definitely the exception, not the rule. And is that worth knocking Bard down to C rank, or even D rank? Maybe, if it wasn't for the fact that Bards get access to exclusive content. I am talking about Performance Mode. Yep, only Bards get to play music. And it's a cool feature, but the same problem arises. Bards can't be around other Bards. There is always competition for the best spots to play, competing for people's attention, and wondering if other Bards will steal your track list. Just try to be courteous and have common sense when playing your music. That Square Enix can technically ban your account over. That's not a joke, they actually can. B tier is for Bard. This might be my most controversial ranking. I am not a fan of White Mage. It has the worst bubble, their regens don't feel as good as Astrologian, it doesn't have the attack options of Scholar, nor the fun gimmick of Astrologian's cards. The best thing about White Mage is their AoE Holy, but even that is a double-edged sword. Holy takes finesse to execute correctly. It has a very long cast time, and if you don't have presence of mind up, and your tank is pulling everything they can, which they will do by the way, by the time you get your first Holy off, your tank may already be dead. Also, because of the stun effect, some tanks won't mitigate right away if White Mage is the healer, because they don't want to waste their mitigation on stunned enemies, while other tanks will mitigate and have it wasted for the same reason. White Mages bring uncertainty to dungeon runs. Also, it's considered bad form to fish for free cures, which kind of adds to the bad vibes. I'm sure I'd appreciate the insane amount of healing a White Mage can dish out at 60 if I ran it in Savage rating. But I haven't yet, and I don't really have a strong desire to. On the plus side, its starting class Conjurer is the only healing class for the first 30 levels, so you are pretty much uncontested for party rolls, on top of the fact that healers already have the shortest queue times, as they are the actual hardest job to play. Still, I gotta give White Mage B tier. I'm sure all you wonderful White Mage mains who totally don't have a reputation of being jerks will leave a nice respectful comment below. The last of the A Realm Reborn jobs, Ninja. Ninja is an odd job. It feels like it can do anything. Stealth, 2 mitigations, can add damage vulnerability to enemies, buff your own damage, close range combat while also having a ton of ranged abilities, AoE ground effect, binding enemies, a teleport, even has unique jumping animation and a Naruto run. Sounds like you can do a lot, right? Well, that's a double-edged sword. Not only do you need to figure out which of your many mudras to use, what order to use them in, but with their low cooldown you need to constantly remind yourself to use them while still maintaining your standard positional rotation and your other cooldowns to make sure your burst is optimal. And it's super unforgiving. What happens if you make a mistake with your mudra rotation? Well, there's a chance you'll cast an ability you didn't mean to, which is just a damage reduction, or you'll cast this. And what does this little bunny do? Literally nothing. That is a complete resource loss with no return. Final Fantasy XIV isn't really known for its button responsiveness, which might lead to mistakes if you're not used to it. On top of that, there are a lot of mudras to remember, but there are some tips people use. However, if you're like me and like playing as many jobs as you can, going back to Ninja always requires a little bit of a refresher. On the flip side, Ninja seems to do really good damage if they can perform their job correctly, and they play more uniquely than any other melee DPS. Probably the best thing they bring to the table, however, is their mug ability. Not only does it apply the vulnerable status to its target, but when it dies, it can occasionally give you more items. And if you are a leather worker or culinarian, this can be nice when farming out mats. When weighing its versatility against its complexity, I'll give Ninja B tier. Moving on to Heavensward jobs, starting out with the original Edgelord's Dark Knight. Dark Knight is probably the funnest tank to play. How their rotation works is basically firing on all cylinders until you run out of gas. Luckily, there isn't too much of a downtime until you get your blood weapon and carven spit back up, so you can start unloading again. They are also the only tank at this level that has a gap closer, which feels super good. Also, now that we can see the type of damage that is inflicted, Dark Mind actually has a purpose, although a niche one. Which brings me to the Dark Knight's downside. It is the squishiest of tanks. It doesn't have the shield, nor the extra mitigation effects that Paladin has, nor the self-healing options that Warrior has. Many healers dread healing Dark Knights for this reason. Well, you might think, well, it sounds like Dark Knights have the best damage, and you said that damage is its own mitigation. Yeah, I can't in full confidence say that Dark Knight beats Warrior in terms of damage. In fact, I'm pretty sure it doesn't. Still, they went from having the worst invuln in the game to probably the best. Just make sure you communicate with your healer to make sure it's utilized correctly.
The man wants to die.
I saved your life! You didn't save my life, you ruined my death, that's what you did!
Dark Knights have access to low queue times, it's fun, and you gotta give it points for aesthetic. Plus, its job quest line has many fans. Dark Knight is a solid A tier. Let's talk about Machinist. Do you like insane damage, high mobility, no positionals, and smashing buttons? Machinist might be the job for you. You might think that being a ranged physical DPS, its damage would be comparable to Bard. Nope. In fact, it's one of the highest damaging jobs at both 50 and 60. The drill feels super satisfying. Overheat allows you to mash buttons without even worrying about screwing up, and it even gets more AoE options at 52. There is a reason this job is the most recommended pick for Palace of the Dead. Shoot 'em up at S tier. Next, the undoubtedly funnest healer available to trial players, Astrologian. This is the true regen healer. They have the most satisfying bubble. I mean, look at that. It just feels good to pop out. Their aesthetic is pretty neat looking, but more importantly, Astrologians get the Arcana gauge. You are drawing out cards, buffing your party members, while also trying to get the correct suit to make yourself buff stronger. While other healers mostly just keep their eyes on the tank, Astrologians are practically a damage meter because they are looking at the entire party to see who deserves their card buffs, which is probably the hardest part of playing Astrologian, as their attention is the most divided out of all the healers, which can lead to issues if the tank needs extra attention. Now, the way I built this job up, you might think that this would be an easy S tier. Well, it would be if Astrologian was stable, by which I mean it is notorious for getting reworked. And guess what? It's getting reworked again in the next expansion. So I can't truly give it the highest rank when I don't know how it will feel down the line. A tier for Astrologian. Now comes the oddball of all jobs. Some might argue, with valid reasoning, that this job shouldn't even be on the list. But I think it's important for new trial players to truly understand what they're getting into with the limited job Blue Mage. Blue Mage is unlike any other job. You pick your abilities, which you have to learn from witnessing and then killing the monster who used them. You don't have access to the Duty Finder, which leaves the Party Finder as the sole way to get parties. Now, you can join normal groups, but many have a stigma against Blue Mages. Blue Mages are considered a broken class when it comes to normal content. With the right combination of abilities, you can deal insane amounts of damage. Thus, they are considered cheese. And if a group is already running older content synced, it is unlikely that they want to break the fight. So that leaves Blue Mage groups, right?
Right? Wrong.
If you've watched my videos, then you already know the problem with trial Blue Mage players. But for those of you not in the know, Blue Mages don't skill sync when they level down for older content. Once you learn a Blue Mage spell, you can cast it at any level. So what does this mean for trial players? Well, you are locked out from learning any of the Stormblood spells, and pretty much all the best spells are in Stormblood. So trial player Blue Mages are pretty much gimped, like a class without a job stone. And as I have said before, it's a real shame, because Blue Mage content that was designed before they had access to Stormblood is now basically unavailable unless you have Stormblood spells. Let this be a case example of how players keeping their endgame kits for lower level content would be a horrible idea. Though you can still do all the single player content and collect all the spells from A Realm Reborn in Heavensward, there is nowhere else for Blue Mage but D tier. There you have it, the tier list for trial available jobs for trial content. What do you think? Do you agree with my ranking? Disagree? Are you a new player and have any questions for these jobs? Let me know in the comments. Remember to help me get my channel to a decent tier by leaving a like and a sub. I'll see you in the world of tomorrow.